1960. No matter how old I become, emotions and memories, both long forgotten, they come rushing back to me when I hear a familiar tune. Age, 5. By the time we reached Tampa, I had picked up a nickname along the way, Biff, a playoff on my middle name, Bivens. I would keep this nickname up through 3rd grade when my teacher decided Biff was not fitting and changed it back to Frank. But now on to one of our first trips to the beaches on the Gulf. Tampa is fairly close to the Gulf of Mexico, so we naturally went to the beach a lot. Our first trip was with our pet beagle. Let's call him Sparky. Now, Sparky was really an outdoor dog, and as such was probably not potty trained, nor mindful of the usual commands of sit, stay, and heel, and I remember jumped up on me a lot. The drive to the beach was a long one. Our dog made the trip all the more interesting. Most family cars back then had bench seats front and back and could easily accommodate 3 adults or 3 kids and a beagle comfortably. The windows were always down because there was no air conditioning for us at the moment, and auto-styling back then inevitably meant there needed to be tons of chrome everywhere with wings in the back, maybe even on the front hood, to keep the car securely planted to the ground for fear of going airborne at highway speeds of 70 miles per hour. I have been reminded that both Mother and Mark were with us on this beach escapade, and as Mark was only a toddler, he would have been riding up front with the parents. There were no car seats with straps for toddlers back then, no headrests, no padded interior, and side view mirrors might have been missing too if they were not added as an option for typical family sedans. How do I know the car was missing side view mirrors? You will find out shortly. Always the adventurer, bringing the mutt along was probably Dad's idea, probably with our enthusiastic support. Dogs, any dog, look as if they're suffering when it's 100 degrees out, and Sparky was no different with tongue hanging out, drool and slobber flying everywhere, smelling more and more like a dog in need of a bath with each passing minute. Anyhow, one of the first things Spot did on the journey was to try and end his misery. Dad was forever whistling or singing some church song. We rarely listened to the radio because there weren't any religious stations on AM like there are today. So, here was probably how this scene unfolded. Mom was forever saying, "Frank, Dad, Frank, you're driving too fast." Suddenly, Sparky, tongue hanging out, drool and slobber flying everywhere, looked as if he had had enough. There was a sort of ledge that ran the length of the car. This is where the beagle was perched, looking as if he was about to leap into oncoming traffic. Sparky had been a bit of a bore for Skip and me, both who tended to be entertained by house pets for short snippets of time, so we began taking in the local sights through the other rolled-down windows. I don't remember who it was that first noticed Sparky trying to commit harikari by taking that precarious perch half out of the back window just behind Dad. We've all seen someone driving along with a dog's head sticking out the window, the mouth being blown open, ears and tongue flapping, the happiest of expressions on their mugs. I recall our dog looked in a similar state for the moment. "Frank! Frank, the dog's about to jump!" snapped Mother. Dad's typical reaction to anything that upset either him or Mother in the back seat, like when breaking up a fight, was to maintain his left hand on the steering wheel and swing wildly with his right hand, and occasionally glance back to get his bearings. This technique wasn't going to work for Sparky. So Dad had held on to the steering wheel with his right hand, he leaned to his right, and wrenched back behind him with his left, and grabbed whatever he could grab of the dog. Skin, fur, maybe his collar, possibly a leg. And it worked. The stupid beagle was dragged back into the car. Dad had saved the day. We were instructed to hold on to Sparky for the remainder of the trip, forcing the dog to sit between Skip and me. Dad had started whistling, singing, or both again. Mother continued with her criticizing Dad's bad driving and taking an occasional glance down at Mark, or out the window. The next thing Skip and I notice is that damn dog of ours is now sitting in the oddest of ways, half in the air and hunched over. What the fuck? Yep, our dog took a crap right then and there. The mystery had been solved. All Sparky had been trying to do was spare Skip and me this horrible affront to our senses. Both visual and olfactory senses. Gag! Mom, Sparky took a shit! I'm just kidding. We used to call shit cute little names back then, like doo-doo or poo-poo. Dad's whistling or singing, the wind noise would again drown out our first voices of alarm. "Mom, Sparky took a doo-doo!" Abruptly, the whistling and or singing stopped. Forever vigilant to ensure we towed the line when it came to representing the family business, we had gotten her attention. "What is it? Gasp! Look, Sparky took a doo-doo!" Glancing back over his shoulder for the briefest of moments, Dad looked to see what was up. Another gasp! Today's common four-letter enunciations have never been a part of either Mom or Dad's repertoire, so their response couldn't have been, "God damn it!" or "Holy Moses!" or "Holy shit!" But Dad's singing and or whistling would have certainly stopped. I recall Dad quickly pulling the car over to the side of the road, disembarking, and then beating the dog. Just kidding. Taking care of business. One advantage of being young is you are largely useless, and therefore largely spectators for much of your early life. All we needed to do was to take turns holding on to Sparky while Dad took care of the nasty. Soon things had been cleaned up enough to pass Mother's inspection, and we were once again off to paradise, the beach. I don't have any memory of Sparky after that little joyride of ours. I'll have to ask the parents one of these days, whatever happened to the beagle? Bozo the Clown. On weekdays afternoons, there was a televised knockoff of the Bozo the Clown Show. This was a live broadcast, a spin-off of Bozo the Clown with guest appearances by local children celebrating their birthdays. Yes, my parents made the mistake of putting my fourth on television in a Bozo-like setting, before cameras, and under the bright spotlights. It wasn't that I did anything seriously wrong or stupid. I just didn't do or say anything. Quiet, thoughtful, reflective people back in the early 1960s were called shy, which I took to mean inferior, especially the way it was being bandied about by the largely extrovert personalities that dominated the household. It wasn't until much later, at age 30, I think, that I discovered that there were different personality types and that I had been behaving quite naturally given I was what Myers-Briggs would classify as an introvert, intuitive thinking, perceiving type individual, basically your everyday nerd. That discovery would come some 25 years too late, so at a tender age I was thrust out onto the center stage. In all fairness, the jury was still out on whether or not I had the same knack for performing on stage as my minister father or as my soprano soloist mother. But unlike both who performed before several hundred members every week, I discovered to my chagrin that I had a very serious phobia, stage fright at this very early age. When I was old enough to fathom what my father could do, I remember sitting in the church pew every week trying to picture myself like him up behind that pulpit. My father's talent was an act too hard for this mute, sensitive, reasonable kid to follow even just pretending, and probably did nothing but steal my aversion to public speaking. I'm not sure how people develop deep phobias. All I know was those unwarranted, dreadful fears that lived within my head during said occasions. Were my phobias a product of my genetic makeup or my personality type? Had some of my early ancestors suffered the same plights, or was I simply a product of my early experiences? Or was my phobia of public speaking related to being the quiet, humble, sensitive person that I turned out to be? 1961. First grade Roosevelt Elementary, September 1961, June 1962. Dad's age, 36. Mother's age, 33. My age, 6 Skip's age, 4 Mark's age, 2 Laura Johnson, March 11th, 1961. I'm here to tell you one set of rules does not fit all when it comes to public education. This system of ours seems to me to be based on theories that originated in the Middle Ages, in Britain, during the Industrial Revolution. We're all taught the same way, the same things for the most average of person. Today's so-called wizards of smart continue to completely overlook the fact that everyone is different with contrasting strengths and unique abilities, that we are all different personality types and should have a curriculum tailored to our inherent abilities. Think about Albert Einstein, also an INTP, who was thought to be an average student by his instructors only because he was forced into a strained, narrow view of education. If and when these wizards finally figure out that education needs to be tailored around the type of person being educated, that is Myers-Briggs, for instance, we will have turned the corner to becoming a better world and a better country, one that maximizes the potential of its citizens and creates men like Albert, a shining example for all the world to imitate. All that said, I began first grade at age 5 for some ungodly reason and found the whole school thing a bit of a rude awakening, to say the least. As I have been saying all along, I was a soundless, well-reasoned, sensible hellion, and in all likelihood a little spoiled, so I approached the elementary school with little regard for behaving or learning or anything. This was true at least up through 4th grade. I was only a first grader when I was taken to the principal's office and received the punishment doled out in those days, a swat to the buns with one of those handmade wooden paddles, very possibly with holes drilled out to limit wind resistance when the principal was taking his or her swing. I was at the tender age of 5. The school was not my cup of tea, especially Roosevelt Elementary. The school was roughly 10 kid miles, 1 mile, away from home, and was a hike I remember taking several afternoons along deserted sidewalks where few fellow classmates dared to tread. The school was named after Theodore Roosevelt. Urban legend has it that the very site had been the camping ground for the Rough Riders just before their departure in the war with Spain, a war fomented by the propagandist Joseph Pulitzer. One bright spot on school days, on those rare days when winter made it all the way to mid-Florida, one of the homes on our trip to school turned into a winter wonderland. Blasting their sprinklers on hard overnight, and the next morning our eyes would be greeted with frozen icicles. On the trees, on the bushes, on the lawn. Everywhere. These people didn't care if it killed every plant in their yard, ... AT was glorious. Back then, I believe the theory was that everyone needed to cover their plants with sheets to keep them from freezing and getting killed off. If so, these wonderful people didn't care, and it happened every time the rare freeze got as far south as Tampa. Wow, it was a generous sacrifice by unknown parties, and has driven me now to seek out similar visual pleasures without regard for risk. It doesn't matter that my car might slide off a road and sit pinned to the roadside barrier for several days at a time, which it has. It doesn't bother me to get iced in for a week when up at the mountain home. It's all because of some unknown's unselfish sacrifice back in the 1950s that I have such joys. I really owe them. Phobias. It could be argued that my case of claustrophobia resulted from my earliest and most severe asthma attacks, when I experienced firsthand the fear of suffocating. The shortness of breath, the tightness I felt in my chest as if a set of weights were crashing down on me, the wheezing sounds I made as I struggled to pull air into my lungs, all those really fun experiences tied up into a number of horrifying episodes. Also, was my particular version of scopophobia a result of being eyeballed by every church member from time memoriam? I knew that keeping up appearances was a sacred canon of being a preacher's kid. It was the result of the expectation that we were to be forever perfect angels. Phobias are real limiters when it comes to experiencing all aspects of life, particularly when the primary workaround for me was simple avoidance. I'm not sure of my issue's root causes. All I know is that I am the one member of the family who has suffered an intolerable dose of phobia mania for most of my life. Another phobia of mine became abundantly clear acrophobia. It happened on my first joyride in a small plane, one of those V-tail Beechcraft bonanzas that were the rage back in the 1960s. Dad had gotten an invitation to be taken up in one. I boarded along with Dad and my brother Skip, taking my place in the back left seat behind the pilot. My brother was planted comfortably to my right, and Dad was in the co-pilot seat. It was a bright, sunny day with little wind, so turbulence played no part in what was to come. Panic, shrieking, tears, the white knuckle clinging onto the back of the pilot seat. The abject hysteria only a 6-year-old could raise in the confines of a smallish 4-seat airtight cabin. Both Dad and Skip had little to no idea what I was going through. Dad had flown through typhoons with nary a scare, and Skip would later go on to get his pilot's license at St. Augustine Municipal Airport. Mother had been an airline stewardess for Eastern, so she did not have the same anxiety, and Mark was too young to find out. I believed I was the only one to suffer a fear of heights, but it turns out Todd also has the same phobia. Today I am a little better at handling my fears, and no longer think about running up and down the aisle screaming at the top of my lungs, "Let me out!" Nowadays I block out thoughts of tumbling to the ground when we hit some turbulence, often in a cold sweat, without looking out one of the cabin windows, white-knuckle clutching my armrests. I can do this, I tell myself. Now, at age 60, it often works. Kids' TV programming. During the weekday, kids programming came on in the afternoons with plots that invariably had cartoon characters like Popeye coming to everyone's rescue, but like Samson and his hair, only after he had his spinach. Otherwise, he'd get his butt kicked by Bluto. Needless to say, canned spinach was a big item for us wee ones around the dinner table for that reason and for a long, long time. Then there was the mind-numbing kids show, Captain Kangaroo. Captain Kangaroo and his sidekick, Mr. Green Jeans, came on every weekday morning and had to be one of the most monotonous shows ever. Yes, it was a regular staple. But unlike Popeye, I can't remember anything that stands out. It was that non-stimulating, slow, and uncomplicated. I call to mind those lamb-chop sideburns of the captains, which might have been inspired by Elvis Presley. Who knows? I recall the dorky-looking hand puppets and their lame attempts at ventriloquism. I remember Green Jeans overalls, but couldn't tell if they were green or blue on the monochrome set. It had to be those cartoons that played throughout all their bumblings and mumblings that kept me from rushing out the front door to play in the street. Almost the same can be said for the sophisticated animated kids program, The Gumby Show, which came on in the afternoons. Gumby and whatever his horse's name was. Oh, yes, Pokey, I think. Anyhow, looking back in my mind's eye, I am now convinced that those two characters sounded like morons. Sure, Gumby could just slide around instead of walking, which was pretty cool. You could even go out and get a Gumby toy at the department store if you were lucky enough. I must have been bored out of my skull, or it was the vogue for my age group, because I do recall getting one of the things, playing with it for a little while before tearing it apart to find out how it ticked, only to discover it was just rubber-coated coat hangers. This act of killing a toy would follow me throughout my early life, most often involving setting fire to some plastic car or airplane model, to later using firecrackers to really blow the things to smithereens. Then there was the Mickey Mouse Club, and yes, I think I might have had a crush on Annette Funicello. This, hard-to-watch afternoon's kids show also had Disney cartoons, which were the prime reason for tuning in, other than Annette. 1962, second grade. Roosevelt Elementary, September 1962. June 1963, Dad's age. 37, Mother's age. 34, my age. 7, Skip's age. 5, Mark's age. 3, Laura's age. 1, second grade was a bit better. I didn't end up in the principal's office again, but I did become a regular fixture out in the hallway in time out, sometimes with a co-conspirator to keep me company. There were, however, some bright spots. There was the day I happened upon a rare, half-buried gemstone in the hard, red clay of the playground. I only just saw the tip of the twinkling jewel, kind of like an iceberg, and I can remember thinking something like, I am so lucky I was in timeout, otherwise I would have never found this priceless jewel. I would come across a whole barrel of rare gemstones when we went up to Gatlinburg several years later, talking about being a little dumbstruck. They're called tiger's eyes, and they're only worth a nickel. What were other standout memories in second grade? The after-school snow cones, the Easter egg hunt on the school playground, and the Pledge of Allegiance at the beginning of each school day. Those occasions when I stood around for what seemed like hours, waiting for the parents while poking at those weird-looking thorn bugs that were covering some of the local bushes. There was the time a dust devil went blowing through the playground yard during physical education. It is true that most kids my age had seen the original The Wizard of Oz, and I recall a few of us approaching the freak of nature and daring one another to jump into the whirling dervish as a test of their kidhood. There were other memorable events. I remember the time we went to see the Mercury capsule parked out in front of the local public supermarket. The date had to be somewhere close to February 20th, 1962, the day John Glenn became the first American to take 3 laps around Mother Earth. I remember the size of the cone-shaped spacecraft. Just how had someone managed to squeeze inside that small, cramped little thing? It was fascinating to see the scarred heat shield, and I remember looking up in the darkening sky and thinking something like, wow, this is really a great, great time to be alive. The backyard war. Naturally, being a kid of the times, one of the things my brothers and I did was declare war on the neighborhood kids. We deemed the empty lot next door enemy territory, and without the parents' knowledge, until later that afternoon, we dug a trench in the middle of the backyard. It was hard work, but well worth it. A real piece of art any real child soldier would be proud to defend. The excavated dirt was piled up to one side and acted as protection against the flying projectiles we would soon have hurled at us. I seem to also recall having one of those step ladders I found in the garage, and maybe a sheet or two of plywood to act as a shield for the watchtower. The trench was deep enough that we hit the metal or concrete covering of an inactive cistern well, once the source of water for the original owners. We were ready for war, but where were the foe, the neighborhood kids? In the late 1950s, World War II was still on most people's minds. Many of the church parishioners were veterans or still in active service. One of the members we regularly visited after church even told me of his experiences following the D-Day invasion. His tales captured my imagination. Stories of his encounters with the German Tiger in particular were riveting and spawned in me a lifetime fascination with groundbreaking machines of war. The veteran went so far as to give me an expensive-looking history of WBY-2 in photos which further solidified my lifelong interest in this and other military conflicts across time. Walter is the one brother who takes after Dad with the social skills to engage with total strangers and public speaking. No problem. He, therefore, was the best suited to go out and find someone we could play with. I'm paraphrasing here, but I must have asked, or made a demand that could have sounded like this. "Skipper, can you go drum up some rival combatants, but make sure they're not too much older?" "Okay." Somebody had to do it, otherwise no one would have ever shown up in that empty lot. Sure enough, as I tidied up the fortifications a bit, Skip succeeded in collecting a few local boys to play. I seem to remember it was to be a gentleman's war with discussions going back and forth about what qualified as things everyone could hurl. No pitchforks, no rocks, which was perfectly fine because Florida doesn't have any rocks, no spears, no baseball bats, no blowguns with darts, but compacted dirt balls from the dig site would be fine, that and any sticks the enemy could find in the empty lot. The 2 or so boys appeared to be older, maybe second graders, but I had the backyard fence to keep them from overrunning the position. Everything appeared perfect, but then Skipper turned traitor and took the side of the opponents. "The hell with him, I'll beat him up later." Things then began to heat up with caked dirt and stick flying here and there, but then Mom shows up. "Just wait till your dad gets home." I can't remember now if there was any fallout when Dad did show up later that day. I can only guess that there must have been given the backyard was all dug up. This was not going to be the only time Thompson kids dug up the backyard. Oh well, to live and fight another day. There was nearly always a silver lining to these sorts of earth-shaking events. In this case, I learned that empty cisterns were dangerous, that I could have fallen in and drowned, but only if I had found a way to move aside the 1/4-inch iron plate or 3-inch concrete slab that covered up the thing. I've been terrified of the possibility that a dirt-covered cistern may lay just underfoot ever since. Now on to the seasonal variations in our subtropical clime. I'm here to tell you there were 2 seasons in Tampa. Winter and autumn combined lasted about a week, spring lasted a couple of hours, and then there was summer. The exciting thing was, we did have leaves falling in the backyard for a week or so every year. Back in the day, there were no plastic bags and no means of getting rid of the leafy litter other than by burning the stuff in the yard. On one occasion, Dad had raked up the perfect pile of leaves. Thank goodness he was really a kid at heart because he let me go to it, destroying his work by jumping onto and into the mess, just like the kids did on television. That was just half the fun. The other half was watching him light the pile of leaves up, slowly smoking at first, but with growing flames and heat. I already mentioned how a candle flame could mesmerize the Thompson kids. This was the same thing, but on steroids. Jumping through billowing smoke as it was carried away from the flames by a slight breeze, it was about as good as it got when it came to childhood excitement. Standing guard, so as to make sure the fire did not get out of hand and burn the whole place down, he was truly one of the most marvelous dads on the planet at that moment. Fire. Big fire. Weeky-watchy springs. Dad's gross ingrown beard hair, mother's singing lessons, the operatic 33 RPM records Ave Maria. 1963, third grade Fishweir Elementary, September 1963, June 1964, age 8. We arrived back in Jacksonville in the summer of 1963 when the Beach Boys' Surfin' USA was the number one. I recall it was a bright, cheery summer day with excitement in the air as we pulled up, trailer in tow, in front of Dad's new assignment, Trinity Methodist Church. I seem to recall being thrilled when we picked up for Jacksonville. For me, there was a sense of adventure in the air. My school transcripts would be lost in transit, so I could later become a patrol boy and go off on one of my most memorable trips to Washington, D.C. The building was stately looking to the eyes of this 7-year-old. It was built in the 1920s of red brick and was nestled among shadows created by soaring, straight-trunk pines. Trinity would be our place of worship for the next 4 years. John Wesley, the founder of the Methodist religion, for some unfathomable reason, thought ministers should not remain in one church too long. That meant no matter how much a family loved a congregation or the reverse, they had to pick up every few years and move on. All I can come up with is Wesley must have thought ministers needed change. That change prevented complacency, something that arises when one remains in a job or position too long. As far as I know, Methodists are the only religion that institutes such practices. For some families, the practice worked. I know now it had. We moved first into an old wood-shingled home next to the church, then to a relatively new parsonage with a basement at 1685 Geraldine Drive. Basements in Florida are very unusual because the water table usually lies just a few feet below the surface, but because the parsonage was built on a bit of a bluff that paralleled Fishweir Creek, the builder was able to pull it off. The home was concrete block and ugly, had a sunken driveway, and was painted some sort of green color with a chain-link fenced backyard. Some of my fondest memories as a kid revolve around this humble abode. That, and the fact we lived just 1 block away from the elementary school we 3 Thompson boys attended. Fishweir. I will go into some detail later, but for now I will begin by highlighting some of the events and people that made this such a memorable time. Fishweir Elementary is, and will probably always be, one of the most picturesque of schools. It had been built to cater to one of the most affluent communities in all of Jacksonville, both Avondale and Riverside. Year after year, the school received awards for its gardens and landscaping, the unique design of the red brick with white trim buildings. It remains largely unchanged from the early 1920s to this day. Named after the local creek I grew up next to, I attended the school during a time when private schools did not exist for elementary school children. There was no need since it catered to an upscale community developed during the Florida real estate boom. Today, the local area remains largely unchanged, with the same magnificent mansions, same moss-covered oak-lined boulevards, all following the contours of the world's second-largest north-flowing waterway, the St. Johns River. Looking back, I consider myself lucky to have attended Fishweir when I did. It was one of only 3 public schools, Ortega and West Riverside being the others, cross-pollinating children's lives from both sides of the tracks. My days there were to be a turning point in how I viewed education. My interaction with many opened my eyes to their studiousness, scholastic acumen, and work ethic. Their grand homes, their lifestyles, and the things they did were both enlightening and a bit humbling. Yes, I consider myself lucky to have lived through such circumstances. Not many growing up with more modest means get a chance to see what the upper strata of the American dream looks like, especially in the making. For those like myself, teetering on the edge of mediocrity, this was the perfect environment for motivating positive change. My peers and the teachers not only challenged my way of thinking, they did so with a warmth I had not experienced before. It was a place that embraced firm but a Gentile Southern charm. I gradually became a product of this environment. Fishweir would like the capital letter H from an air balloon, the front of the school, the lower half of the H faced Herschel Avenue and was where the first and second grader classes were located. Set a dozen steps below the rest of the school wings, the front of the school was separated by a garden courtyard where Old Glory flew atop the single flag-mast pole that acted as the centerpiece. This was where my brothers got their first taste of public education. They were, of course, The complete opposite of me and perfect angels with superior marks in just about every area, including citizenship. Classrooms for 3rd through 6th grades moved from low to high along the upper 2 wings, ending with the cafeteria on the left-handed side and a special education building on the right. One side of the school had classroom windows that looked out onto the bike shed and playgrounds, the other out onto nothing, a chain-link fence and some shrubbery to hide the backside of a hardware store and some houses. The auditorium and the administrative offices took up the space of the crossbeam portion of the letter. I soon found I had fallen behind a bit when it came to reading thanks to my irreverent behavior in 1st and 2nd grades, and I was placed into a group of 1. Needless to say, I did not want to appear to be the only illiterate in class, so I began to make an effort to catch up. Probably with Mother's help, I became an average reader by the time I moved on to 4th grade, but before that day arrived, a few other memorable events took place. I recall 3rd grade as being a lackluster year save for the 1963 introduction of the icy. Sure, the summer had been a lot of fun with new, exciting things to do and see, but I was the same little rebel who went off to school one early September morning. There were, however, a few items that helped lighten my spirit those first few days back in purgatory. I remember a new Chicago Bears lunchbox, the new school supplies that always seemed to get more sophisticated the higher the grade, and usually a new wardrobe. It was a grand old time to be alive when air raid sirens went off daily and often signaled to the 3rd grade teacher it was time to practice the duck and cover routine. It probably could have also been called bend over and kiss your ass goodbye practice as well, for all the good it would have done if a real atomic bomb had gone off in the vicinity. You can still find some of those black and white public safety commercials out on the internet, the same infomercials we watched in class showing us how to scurry up under our desks that rarely would cover the entire body. It was a great exciting time to be alive. It was a Friday, November 22nd, 1963, around 1:30 that afternoon, when the 3rd grade teacher came into class sobbing, President John F. Kennedy had just been assassinated. I recall the day as if it were just a few weeks ago. We were let out of class early, and I can remember walking home on what had turned out to be a rainy, dismal day that mirrored the tragedy of the event. I remember my mood was somber. I had never seen an adult cry before, and the monochrome television coverage only exacerbated the morose nature of this day. The Kennedy $50 would commemorate the loss of this president the following year. It became a collector item for coin collectors, especially when silver was taken out of U.S. coins. 3rd grade was also the time I learned how to swim at the YMCA on Riverside Avenue. Beginners were called tadpoles, and this being the Young Men's Christian Association, we all swam in the nude. Don't ask me why. Even now it doesn't make any sense to me we're the founders Greeks or something. Swimming lessons at the Y were pretty straightforward. You got naked, took what was inevitably a cold shower to clean off before you scampered off to jump into the relatively warm water of the pool every Saturday morning. Lessons consisted of going through the motions of swimming in stages, while either holding onto the side or by standing in the shallow end. You graduated from the tadpoles when you could dive and touch the outlet cover at the deep end of the Olympic-sized pool. The goal of every serious tadpole was to become a trout or flying fish. I can't remember which. The next big leap was to become a porpoise, followed by a swordfish, and finally, the pièce de résistance, a shark. By the way, sharks were allowed to wear swim trunks. They even qualified to become lifeguards if that was their teen dream. Great-grandmother Mattie Salome passes away on January 21st, 1964. Neighbor Ronnie Humber, their Ramblers, Six Gun Territory, The Roadrunner Show, and The Jetsons. Killing ants after school takes place of toy soldiers. The Chinaberry Tree Necklace, the first hummingbird sighting, red bugs and fingernail polish. Saturday RC bottle cap matinees at the Florida Theater, The Three Stooges. Brothers who were always winners when it came to those ticket stub lotteries. Church softball league, the man hobbling with cramps. Dipper dance typically after Sunday night services for my favorite, Pistachio. First real Halloween. A variety of Christmas trees, term Xmas, a family no-no, favorite food group, Babe Ruth candy bars. Watching the Flintstones meant we were at Grandmother Abercrombie's. the sickly reek of the Glidden chemical plant, for years was wrongly thought to be the pecan trees, also at Grandmother Abercrombie's, riding in the back of a custom-built caboose car, something with a Shriner on Trout River Boulevard, overnight tubing fun at Parishioners Lake House, Sunday afternoons at Papa Churchwell's, his Lincoln Continentals, attending his church services as part of the Lakeland Methodist Conference. 1964 4th grade Fishweir Elementary, September 1964. June 1965. Age. 9 school began in early September. The one bright spot was the upcoming television season with new programming, and 1964 proved to be a banner year when it came to entertaining kids' shows. There was Johnny Quest, which began airing on the 18th, and The Man from U.N.C.L.E. on the 22nd. But most looked forward to shows of all were the twin just-in-time for Halloween programs, The Munsters and The Addams Family. Halloween would and remains, for some unfathomable reason, one of my favorite holidays of the year, one rung below Christmas. Thanksgiving, Easter, and St. Patrick's Day all paled in comparison, and besides, we weren't Irish, and those first 2 days invariably meant spending countless boring hours with the family. Christmas, for fairly obvious reasons, was the most special holiday of the year. Not only were you out of school for nearly 2 weeks, and you also got to tear apart presents earmarked for you from under a gloriously decorated Christmas tree. Christmas trees were the centerpiece decoration during the holidays. They were inevitably positioned so that passers-by could see them through the large picture window at the front of the parsonage. Our trees ranged from the real thing to the artificial, from the solid white to a metallic silver with a revolving color wheel. In the weeks leading up to that glorious day, we would spend hours parked on the couch, leafing through Sears and J.C. Penney catalogs, earmarking those pages with the latest toys we hoped the parents, Santa Claus, would bring. Yes, of course, my brothers knew Santa wasn't real. They found out just as soon as I learned from the neighborhood bully, Scott Smith, who had apparently never believed in the white-bearded wonder that he didn't exist. Keeping up the ruse, we kept the parents in the dark. Who cared? Generally, all 3 of us would receive some variation of the same toys, but Skipper and Mark, looking almost like twins, always got something different. Sometimes this parental strategy worked to my advantage. Sometimes it backfired, like in the case of the pop guns we all got this Christmas. I was bigger than my brothers, and that usually translated into me getting bigger toys. This was true for pop guns, true for bicycles, true for just about anything where size played a role in Santa's selection process. Schwinn Stingray bikes were the rage of the times, that and English racers with those thin tires, curved under handlebars and seats ridiculously small and hard, especially when compared to our banana seats. Of course, there were less expensive knockoffs of the Schwinn bikes. That is probably what we got for Christmas. Who cared? They looked just like the Stingray, the only civilized transportation any normal kid would be found riding, with the small front wheel and the long handlebars just like you'd see on Hell's Angels choppers. The seat was long and padded for comfort, and often sported a backrest to aid in the popping of wheelies, just like on the big guys. Anyhow, the 3 of us had apparently been good enough such that on Christmas Day, each of us got one. My longest and scariest bike ride took place several days later on a bright, crisp winter day. It was mid-afternoon, and I remembered being bored. I needed a little adventure in my life. Heck, I had new wheels, and they needed to be exercised. I started riding. I came up upon the drive-in burger joint at the end of Geraldine Drive and paused, thinking, this isn't far enough. I began pedaling down St. John's Avenue and came upon Boone Park. No, this isn't far enough either. My little chopper bike wanted to take me further. Would the thing get me lost? No. No, I wouldn't get lost because I was keeping a studious track of where the bicycle was taking me. Past the Avondale shops, past Edgewood Avenue. Wait! The sun was no longer overhead. Where did it go? How long had I been gone? I had no idea, nor way of knowing. Should I go on? Yes, you should go on, replied a little voice inside my head. This is going to be a bike ride for the ages, a monumental event. But wait, aren't the parents going to be angry? I asked myself. They could be already out in the car looking for me. No, replied the little voice. Remember, Dad's car probably won't start. That's right, I exclaimed to myself. It is a piece of Shisen, Shit that never cranks over unless he has help push starting it. With suicide doors too, I might add, replied the little voice. But I don't want a spanking, I responded. The little voice answered, We won't get a spanking, I promise. Do you promise? Absolutely, I promise. Listening to someone's little inner voice can be helpful at times. It can even help save your buns occasionally, like the time it warned me I had no business surfing at Sebastian Inlet, a place called Monster Hole. Monster Hole? It was the summer of 1970, and the name of the surf spot was known as Monster Hole, for reasons that need little explanation. The break was a sandbar reef and only broke when the waves got really, really big, over a third of a mile out. We could see the spot firing off as we drove over Sebastian Inlet using the AIA bridge. The scene looked like something right out of Surfer magazine. I could even make out the little black specks that were the local surfers dwarfed by the walls of rising and crashing waves. The contour of the ocean floor rises up, and when the surf is big, the waves form long, long lines. 10 minutes later, from the parking lot, we stood outside the VW wagon we had converted into a surf mobile and watched as the sets of waves came rolling in one after another. A comparatively recent article from Florida Surf Museum magazine had the following to say about this break. Most Florida surf spots are standard beach breaks distinguishable from one another by the fluctuations of swell, tide, and wind. Some distinguish themselves from others due to subtle variations in bottom topography. Fewer still have achieved a mythical status that often doesn't hold up once the hype is separated from reality. Monster Hole is where reality and hype come together. Surfing Monster Hole is not easy. The sandbar forms 1/3 of a mile offshore, and since there are seldom other surfers out, it is hard to gauge the size or shape of the shore. The paddle out takes a solid 15 to 20 minutes, and the peak is not really distinguishable until you are nearly out to the break. The length of the paddle gives you ample time to reflect on the fact that you are paddling through a current that constantly funnels chow into the mouths of unseen predators lurking just beneath the murky water. Once you make it to the lineup, you may find that the takeoff zone is shifting all over the place. None of us had ever surfed a location breaking more than 50 yards offshore, and certainly never that far out, so it took machismo and having another idiot friend committed to going out to get me to jump in. There was a slight offshore breeze, and the surface of the ocean was relatively glassy, inviting, and made for easy paddling out past the shore break. Two of our little party, Skip and Donnie Thomas, remained behind after wishing us a fond farewell. Both were probably now telling one another that that was the last they expected to see of their two companions paddling out into what could only be described later as bone-crushing ground swells. Terry and I paddled out next to one another, each of us reminding each other of past surfing exploits. For me, I needed to keep from caving into my inner voice now beginning to make itself heard. Frank. Oh, Frankie, what the hell are you doing? Do you have any idea what you're paddling out into? Sure I do, I replied in a whisper. Those waves look perfect. Look there, they aren't even closing out. Yes, but you're still only halfway out. What do you think they're going to look like up close? I believed myself to be honest-to-goodness surfer at the time. I had seen the movie Endless Summer, after all. Oh, be quiet, I tell myself. If Terry can handle this, so can... Boom. Moments later, there's another... Boom. Paddling with my head just above the water, the incoming sets are beginning to crash really hard upon the reef. Gulp, those things are really big. Our plans were to detour around the outer right part of the reef and approach the break from the side. This way, we could avoid getting caught in a set after working our way through the washing machine of whitewater. Is it my imagination, or are those waves getting bigger? I ask myself. Yes, they're getting bigger. You need to turn around. Now! From the shoreline, it was easy to see those waves were getting bigger, some close to 2 stories high and coming in sets of 4 to 5. Take a look at how your partner is holding up. Turning, I see a strained look of growing panic on Terry's face. The crashing sound of the waves becomes more deafening as we come up upon the rightmost side of the reef. The waves are breaking just 50 yards from where we are catching our breath. Terry! No response. The thundering of breaking waves drowned out the call to my friend and fellow fool. Hey! Terry! I shout at the top of my lungs. "What?" he replied with a pale yet sun-tanned face. "What's the plan?" I shout. "The hell if I know!" He yells back as we both observe the power and scariness of those waves breaking just in front of us. "It's time to turn around! Time to head back while we still can!" exclaimed the little voice. I looked back to the shoreline, back to where the surf mobile was parked. My brother and Donnie are probably sitting around smoking a doobie and laughing things up. When the waves are big, really big, like on this day, most surfers spend much of their time just paddling around looking for what they hope will be the safest wave to ride in. That is where both Terry and I found ourselves at that moment. Trouble was, every wave was much too much to fathom riding. It's okay to be a coward today. No, I tell myself as my heart rate quickens at the thought of dropping in on one of those growing monsters. All I have to do is remember that I know what I'm doing. I know. I stop talking to myself, stopping myself short when something catches my attention out of the corner of my eye. Holy Moses, I told you, something wicked this way comes. Something big is beginning to rear its ugly head on the horizon, a wave growing far out to sea, so big it seems to cover the horizon, and it is coming straight for us. Mother Fickin! The mother of all waves is beginning to take shape, growing ominously as it approaches. I told you, now you've had it. Shut the fickin' up! I'm not sure what to do other than to point out the menace to Terry, who exclaimed with several explicatives. We had no idea how Monster Hole broke. We assumed every deep-water wave broke only over the reef, a reef that was the size of several soccer fields and nowhere else. All three of us, Terry, me, and the little voice, looked on in abject fear. Even my inner voice did not know what to say. Oh my God. At first, we are frozen in fear, but the flight part of the fight-flight self-preservation instinct of the primitive mind soon kicked in, and we are paddling our asses off to the right of the approaching menace. Our best bet was to get to the shoulder or the goofy footer side of the wave before the thing came tumbling down. I can't believe my eyes. Some local maniac is paddling straight for the monster. He's trying to catch it. The idiot is trying to catch it. Strangely, the peak of the wave seems to shift to my left as it comes up upon the shallows opposite the direction I'm paddling. The surfer strokes 1, 2, or 3 times and is suddenly up on his feet. I don't have time to watch the suicide ride. I'm too busy paddling my ass off trying to get over the wave before it breaks. Up and over, I am about to breathe a sigh of relief when renewed panic overtakes me. This wave is part of a set. Shit! Boom! The first wave comes crashing down behind me. The sound is upsetting beyond belief, and I continued paddling my ass off to try and get to the outside. What the hell was I thinking? The second wave of the set breaks outside. Boom! Moments later, a wall 6 feet high comes rushing down on me. I quickly react by diving, surfboard and all, underwater into the onrushing tempest. The technique only partially works, and I lose my board in the turmoil. I'm wearing a bungee cord. It is tied off to my skeg and my ankle. If I were to lose my surfboard, at least I would not have to swim back to shore to retrieve it. I'm pushed back almost 50 yards. I've got to get the hell out of here before it is too late. The surf spot is turning into a death trap. The waves are continuing to build and are beginning to break on both sides of the reef. I can't paddle out to sea. The rip current from the inlet would probably carry me out into the Gulf Stream, where I would disappear. Forever. I don't dare paddle along the shoreline. It, too, is beginning to break with big waves. I've got to get back to shore before I'm overcome by fatigue and panic. I don't need to tell my partner. He is already paddling like a madman trying to catch one of the smaller waves to ride back to shore. My arms are weary from all my panicked paddling, and yet I feel I'm a goner if I try and wait the day out, ... It was only going to get worse. I had to get back to shore quickly. I followed my partner's example and made for the right portion of Monster Hole. My hope, too, was to catch the shoulder of one of the smaller waves and belly ride the thing in. I just had to get to the whitewater, only that was still 100 yards off. I was still in the impact zone. The waves were bowling up faster than anything I had experienced with the normal beach breaks of North Florida. Fear gripped me as I looked down the sheer 10-foot wall of a wave I attempted to paddle into. What started out as a 5-foot wave jumped to nearly 3 times that height when it hit the reef. I tried another, but with no success. You couldn't paddle into these kinds of waves like I was used to. You had to position yourself in the very heart of the beast, at the peak just before the blasted thing broke. Local surfers who had the spot wired were dropping in and making their cut before they hit the bottom, otherwise the wave would come down on them with a force I had not witnessed before. Only local surfers with years of experience surfing the inlet would be able to pull this off. I remember looking down into the belly of one beast from the lip of a wave and seeing one of the locals a dozen feet beneath me cranking by at speeds I had never witnessed surfing. I was doomed unless I could get out of this mess. Suddenly, the break I had been hoping for arrived. My saving grace came when a bigger-than-normal wave broke outside the impact zone, further out to sea. I turned the nose of my board shoreward as the wall of whitewater came rushing up on me. It caught me, but the violence of the wash was trying to rip the board from my grip. If I lost the board where I was, I felt I would have been a goner. I struggled to hold on as I was carried along, petrified with fear. It carried me on and on for what seemed an eternity. And then, slowly, the force of the whitewater was beginning to weaken. I carried myself to the limits of the reef and breathed a sigh of relief. I had made it. Still a third of a mile from the shore, I paddled as quickly as my exhausted arms would allow. 30 minutes later, I touched the sandy bottom of the beach and emerged slowly from the now frothy, turbulent ocean, drained of energy. The relief I felt cannot be explained in words. I could have easily lost my life this day, but I had lived to tell the tale. I now realize I had come very close to the edge and that someone up above had been watching over me that terrifying, memorable day. This was one of several surf trips I would take to the area. Never would I see Monster Hole as big and threatening as I witnessed that day. I now have a smidgen of pride at having gone out that day at Monster Hole, a day when the reef was hitting on all pistons, a day like no other I have ever seen since. Next time, listen to your little voice. It probably knows of what it speaks. Now let's hop back to that breakaway bike ride of mine some 10 years earlier. The bike ride continued. I replied to the little voice, "Okay, little voice, then we must go on. Start thinking of some reasonable fibe we can tell the parents when we get back." "Okay, most definitely," my inner voice promised. And so we went. The bike, me, the little voice off into the unknown, just like our ancestors had done before us. I, too, was following in their footsteps. The bug was in my genes. Yes, this little bike trip was a bit terrifying, but that was what made it all the more exciting. On and on we went, the little voice and I into uncharted territory. We came upon another park. It looked similar to Boone Park, but different. This park had a baseball field and a basketball court. Say, I didn't know there were other parks around. Hey, wait, I recognize that building. That's the library with the cool basement, the one Mother took me to get me interested in reading. The games teachers and adults played to get kids to read something during the summer months were little contests, and tally sheets for the number of books you read in the months of June through August. These official-looking wall hangers were then returned to the teacher on the first of the new school session. I seem to recall only playing the game one summer. I recall my favorite books were on bees and dinosaurs. Dinosaurs captivated my imagination, including the armored three-horned Triceratops, the odd-looking Stegosaurus with its spiked tail, and the club-tailed Ankylosaurus. I discovered these treasures in yet another basement, the lower level of the Willow Branch Library. I rode up to the front of the building and paused, taking in all the unfamiliar sights. It was winter and the days were shorter. The sun now hung low in the sky, suggesting it was later than I thought. I felt like Christopher Columbus must have felt when he discovered the West Indies. Strong feelings for a 9-year-old. How was I going to tell anyone about this little adventure, of how far I had gone off the reservation? The parents were the only ones worth telling, but I could not in fear of some slight against my person. There was a chill in the air. I did need to start heading back. It was growing colder as the sun slid behind the canopy of pines and oak trees. I could tell it was getting late. The shadows were growing longer. I needed something easier to remember than the name of the library. Cherry Street. The name of the intersection is Cherry and Park Streets. That is something I can remember. George Washington cut down a cherry tree, didn't he? Yes, yes, of course he did. Washington had cut down a cherry tree, and Cherry was also the street name. I can remember that. A sudden chilling breeze awoke me from my heady contemplations. It was time to get headed back. There was no argument from the little voice. Now was the time to head home and hopefully slide in unseen. I turned the chopper around at the corner of Park and Cherry Streets, feeling a strong sense of pride and accomplishment. I then began wheeling my way home, retracing my every route, hoping upon hope that I wasn't in big trouble. I pedaled a lot faster and headed back. Saving time was vital. Down Park Street I went, past Edgewood Avenue up until I reached the tennis courts at Boone Park. I took a left and pedaled fast through the growing darkness of tall, straight pines. I came up upon Herschel Avenue, looked both ways, and walked my little bike across just like I was supposed to do. Now, pedaling madly through the second section of the park up to St. John's Avenue. I could have taken a right on Herschel and saved myself quite a bit of time, but I did not know that at the time. Faster and faster, I pedaled along the sidewalk, feeling more and more relieved as I neared the drive-in diner. I carefully walked my bicycle across the busy four-way intersection, waiting for the traffic lights to turn red. I was almost home. Only 2 blocks left. Only 1 block. There it is. My ugly greenhouse. Oh no, Dad's car is missing. I was perspiring as I came screeching to a sliding stop up out front of the parsonage. I was scared. Where was Dad? And how had he gotten his car started? Was he out looking for me? Gulp. Where's that little inner voice of mine? It said it was going to help me come up with a reasonable explanation for my absence. There was no response. I pulled one of the 2 garage doors open, and Mom's baby blue something or other auto was parked where it normally sat when she was not out shopping for groceries. I pried the kickstand down with my foot and leaned it against the wall next to the other bikes. I had already decided I was going to go upstairs through the lower level. It was easier to sneak in that way. The basement was a bit warmer than outside, but not by much. Rarely did we use the basement, so it was normally dark, cold, and empty. The garage door opened up into a dimly lit room, and what remained of the sunlight came streaming in through a pair of windows along the back wall. They marked the demarcation line between being above and below ground level. I took the hallway to the left, where we hung the yellow rubberized raincoats and galoshes. I took a left and saw in the dim light the closed doorway of my future basement bedroom. The stairway led up to the left to a closed doorway that kept heat from escaping into the cold, dark rooms below. Creeping as silently as I could up the stairs, I winced each time one of the wood steps creaked under my weight. I was greeted by a wonderful feeling of warmth as I emerged from the cellar. "Hi, Mom." "How did you like your new bike?" "Hey, she's not angry. Looks like she doesn't even know I was gone all that long." "Wow, it is the greatest. I can't believe I've gotten away with it. What's more, she looks like she's in a good mood. I am beaming and thrilled to have ridden as far as I have and made it back unscathed. I've got to tell someone." "Mom, you won't believe where I've been." "Where, Biff?" "All the way to Cherry Street." The summer of 1965 was eventful. There was a summer day camp at Fishweir where I first heard about Camp Immokalee. There was the week we went up with the Fletchers to Lake Junalusaca, the Methodist retreat in North Carolina, and Ronnie Humber and my discovery of stolen rifles under a tree stump inside bamboo at the playground. The stolen rifles, police reward, baseball, and fielder's mitt. Seeing one of those amphicars, amphibious cars. The lemonade stand selling Christmas cards door to door, the eye of Hurricane Dora, September 10th, 1964. The power outages hiding in the basement, playing among downed trees, and the flooded creek. Gar Hunter, selling cattails, stung by hornets. Memorable moments. Petunia Clark's Downtown, November 1964, playing on the radio as we drove about downtown Jacksonville during the Christmas holidays. White 1964 Chrysler 300K towing trailer to Smoky Mountain's Bears and Stone Mountain tubing. Screaming Girls Help, Beatles, July 29, 1965 at Florida Theater. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea at Edgewood Theater, and the Weeki Wachee Springs Clock. Hang On. Sloopy by the McCoys is released in July 1965. Favorite teen colognes. Brute, English Leather, and British Sterling. Learning to Fish from Sisters Creek Bridge.